The last time the house felt like a home. The snow was soft enough to swallow sound. It fell in curtains against the windows, a steady hush that made every small noise inside. The kettle's soft whistle, the clock's patient tick, the nervous clink of cutlery, sound excessive, like someone had wound the world down to watch us. We had all promised ourselves a quiet, ordinary Christmas. I had imagined easy laughter, Emma's small excited face when she opened a present, my mother in a red dress that always made her look younger than she felt. I had imagined the kind of peace that stitches a family together for just one night. Instead, the night yawned open like an old wound. We sat at my father's table, the one he had sanded and varnished with hands that smelled of sawdust and engine oil. The candles burned low and yellow, pooling light over the lacquered wood. The turkey steamed. The house smelled of orange peel and cloves, a scent I had always associated with warmth and safety. My mother sat at the head of the table, composed as always, pearls glinting, lips pressed into a smile that never reached her eyes. Emma, 15 and all angles beneath her too big sweater, sat across from her. She had my mouth and my shyness. When she laughed, it was small and a little astonished, as though the sound were something she'd discovered by accident. Conversation moved in small, predictable circles. Television shows, a cousin's engagement, who had trimmed the hedges too late. My mother's sentences were short and measured, a careful thread of civility. I remember thinking, with a sudden shameful clarity, how much she had always wanted to govern the mood of a room. That wish had hardened into a habit. It was a habit I had learned to sidestep for years. Then she looked at Emma and everything broke. "You don't belong here," she said, so softly I thought at first that I had misheard. The words landed like a stone in water. One ripple, then another, then the whole surface churning. Emma froze. Her fork slipped and clattered against her plate. The room tilted in that moment. Conversations fell away. The laughter dissolved into a silence sharp enough to cut. "Grandma." Emma's voice was small. I didn't. My mother did not look at me when she continued. Her eyes fixed instead on something across my daughter's shoulder, as if she saw a ghost sitting in that empty chair. "You know what I mean," she said. "This house isn't for her." I felt the world tilt and the old argument that had lain between us all those years. The one about who we were allowed to be, the choices we were allowed to make, awake like a sleeping thing. I stood fast because standing felt like the only honest response. "That's enough," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. "She's a child." My mother's mouth tightened. "You can pretend," she said, "but pretending does not change the fact that some things should not be brought back into a house that remembers." I remember the way the fire snapped in the hearth, as if punctuating her sentence. I remember my husband's hand on my knee, the weight of his uncertainty. I remember Emma's face, how it went white, then pink, a blush born of confusion and shame. We left early. Emma's hands shook as she gathered her coat. She refused to look at my mother on the way out. Later, in the safety of our car, as snow whispered to the roof, she asked in a voice so small it might have been the wind, "Mom, why did she say that?" I had no answer. Not a real one. I told myself the simplest thing. My mother had a way of saying cruel things when grief sat heavy in her chest. Anger was often a language for pain. We went home that night with the radio on and the lights off, and I lay awake listening to the house breathe and pretending I had the shape of an explanation. The truth came, however, like a splinter. It lodged itself and would not be dislodged. 2 nights later, I found her in the dark living room, a single lamp burning, a photograph clutched in her hands. It was the sort of picture you only took once, and only when you meant to keep it forever. 2 girls with matching ribbons in their hair, Christmas sweaters, mouths open mid-giggle. One of the girls looked exactly like me at 6 years old. The other looked like her but smaller, a mirror throwing back a life I had never been permitted to remember. "There was another," she said before I could speak. The breath in the room seemed to stop. You had a sister. The word fell like a revelation and like an accusation. I had been a child then, and I would have noticed a sister. I would have remembered laughter in the other crib, a hand to hold while crossing the street, a small companion in the secret world we made for ourselves on summer afternoons. I had none of those memories. Or at least I thought so. She died. My mother said, eyes on the photo. The year before you turned 17. I did not think 17 had anything to do with me. I had been angry at her for the things she, in her limited way, had done, the sharp words, the expectations, but I had never imagined she had kept such a secret. The house that had raised me felt suddenly like a stage set, its props arranged to tell a story only one person could recite. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, though the question was foolish. I already knew the answer. I had always known that silence could be an armor as well as a weapon. She looked up and in her face I saw the outline of an old raw grief. Because every time I think of her I see what I lost. Every time you smiled at me, I remembered what I couldn't bring back. I thought protecting you meant protecting both of you from that same pain. You hid a whole person from me, I said. A sister. You erased half my childhood. I tried to erase the memory because it was poison, she replied. Because I could not live with the thought of 2 children and only one of them coming home. The story that unspooled after was not cinematic. There were no clear, righteous heroes or pure villains. There had been a fire, my mother said, and smoke in a collapsed stairwell, and a choice made in the seconds between breath and collapse. She had taken one child and pulled her to safety. She had reached, and for reasons that still didn't make any sense to me, she had not taken the second. She had been too slow, she had said. She had been trapped. She had been certain there was nothing to be done. She had gone on afterwards, to build a life heavy with a single remembered face and a million unspoken apologies. I left that night with the photograph under my arm and a nausea that felt both physical and moral. How had a person been so central to my life and so absent from it? How had I learned to live in the shadow of a blank and called it normal? The old edges of my anger smoothed into something colder, a kind of stunned and careful sorrow. Emma, in the days after, watched me with an attention that made me feel like an exhibit behind glass. She had become a kind of living echo that conjured a past I had been taught not to mention. My mother avoided the word Emma when she could. When she could not avoid it, she would excuse herself mid-sentence, as if saying it aloud might summon those quick and terrible images again. Weeks stretched into months. I tried to be a mother in the straightforward ways. Phone calls, band rehearsals, parent-teacher conferences. But the secret I had inherited felt like a weight I could drop only by destroying something else. I discovered boxes in my mother's attic, shoeboxes of letters, a journal kept in a hand that had once been steady. In the pages she wrote with a trembling pen. I read guilt in curlicues and fear in the way she described breath. There are things that have a way of repeating themselves in families if you do not learn the lesson the first time. Old grievances become habits. The stories you refuse to tell grow into monsters defined by absence. My mother had been a maker of order, and the order she had made was the very scaffolding for the lies she preserved. One brittle evening, long after Christmas had become something to get through rather than celebrate, my mother fell asleep in her chair and did not wake. I was at work, and the neighbor called to say she had found the living room still lit, the tea cold beside her. Helplessness, the old domestic kind, filled me in a way that made me look at all my choices and feel them like stones. I did not go to the funeral. The idea of going into the house and seeing the furniture and photographs and the consequences of a single night was unbearable. Emma went, though. She left a small drawing on the casket, 2 stick-figure girls under a tree, and in that simple gesture was the fault line that separated me from the rest of the people who had been present. After my mother's death, the house that had held our unsaid things fell into a peculiar silence. For weeks, I would go into the attic to unpack the boxes of her things. Ribbons, a child's shoe, a Christmas ornament. Things so personal and ordinary that they became almost violent in their normality. I watched home videos. I pressed my ear to the static and listened to laughter and the motor of a camera. And for a moment I could feel the pulse of a life I had not known was missing. There is a particular cruelty in being left with only fragments. If you are told everything, how the fire started, what was said in the minutes when things broke, you can at least make a story of it. When you are given pieces, you are left to imagine. I built a picture in my head, and like all pictures built of memory and rumor, it exaggerated and omitted in equal measure. I imagined the moment in the stairwell, the heat, the smoke, the panicked hands. I imagined how easily one choice could have been made differently. I thought about the way guilt had lived in my mother's bones and had been passed down like an heirloom in the shape of a wound. Emma left for college 3 years after my mother died. We spoke less on the phone as schedules filled and independence took the place of night visits. When she came home, we spoke in the measured ways of adults who had lived through a few winters. Once in late autumn, she brought with her a small sketchbook. She opened it to a page and showed me a drawing. A house with a candle burning in the window, a small girl in the yard, a set of footprints that stopped at the door. She said nothing. She smiled the way people do when they are both present and far away. Sometimes, she said quietly, I think about how easy it would have been for things to be different. I wanted to tell her then that we live our lives in the company of near misses, and that most of our tragedies are quiet. I wanted to tell her that while my mother made a choice, it was also the kind of accident that can swallow reason whole. Instead, I said the only true thing I could. I know. There is a particular cruelty in being forced to love someone because she came from you. I had loved my mother, in fits and starts, with a love heavy with obligations and a strange tenderness. In my mother's absence, that love rewired itself into a ledger of debts and apologies. I found myself resenting the person I had been, and it made me angrier at the choices she had made, and at the ways in which silence had been used almost as a weapon. The house itself softened with time, as houses do. Carpets wore in, wallpaper faded. I planted bulbs in the garden no one would see right away. Sometimes, on long nights when the air outside was as white as the inside, I would make dinner for 2 and set the other plate because the motion of setting did something to my breathing. That plate remained untouched. It was a gesture at once ridiculous and essential. Ritual can be a poor substitute for conversation. Years blurred. Emma graduated and moved into a city with tall buildings and strangers who would not ask about the family funeral. She loved someone who had no tie to our household wrongs, and for that I was grateful. We grew apart not from anger but from the gentle drift that comes with living. The memory that had defined a part of our family's life remained, like a crack in a vase you keep on the mantel, visible unfilled. Sometimes at night, I swear I hear the quick footsteps of a smaller girl running through the house, a light, impatient patter that could be anything or nothing. Once, I opened the attic and it was empty except for boxes and dust, and a small toy soldier that must have been in the photo my mother had kept. I sat down on the floor, and I wept for the life that never got to happen, for the way we had tried to stitch ourselves into a narrative where blame could be apportioned in clean lines. There are families that get through everything. There are families that pick away at hard things until they bloom into reconciliation. That was not mine. Our story held within it the current of something older. Fear so deep it turned kindness into avoidance. Memory so sharp it dissolved any attempt at gentle reckoning. My mother's choice was the axis upon which everything pivoted. It was the narrow moment that shaped decades. She had confessed in her last days to someone whose memory had been trained to forget, and that confession had ripple effects I did not know how to navigate. In the end, there was no neat closing. No one returned to the house to repair it. No great absolution was offered at a graveside. The last Christmas we had, the one that started all of this, became an echo I could not place. Each year as December rolled toward the solstice, I found myself making the same choices. A fire in the hearth, a plate set with place for the absent, an early dinner eaten in silence. It was a liturgy of the living, a way of carrying the dead through the day without pretending they would return. I am older now. Time has a way of sanding the edges off even the most ferocious grief. I have learned to live with certain things as having no resolution. The photograph of the two girls remains, tucked into a book that I rarely open. On mornings when the house is empty and the light is thin, I sometimes take it down and hold it like a relic, feeling the chill of paper beneath my fingers and the stubborn ache of curiosity. I trace the faces with the care of someone reading Braille. If there is a moral to this story, it is not one I would offer as comfort. The moral, if such it is that people are capable of small and large acts of both mercy and harm, and that grief can ossify into a law that dictates where people may stand. Secrets do not shield. They isolate. We like to think we can protect those we love by controlling what they know. Sometimes the attempt at protection is the cruelest brutality of all. The wind has started up tonight. It rattles the loose shutters and carries the smell of wet pine through the open window. I have set a plate at the table because habit is an honest thing, and because the act of setting is a small devotion to what remains. There is no forgiveness that makes itself present in a miracle. There is only the slow work of endurance, the quiet of ordinary days, and the knowledge that some nights will always be steady with what never came to pass. When it is Christmas now, the house feels like a room from someone else's life. The winter light is brittle and honest. Sometimes, when a car passes and its tires hum against the snow, I look toward the small backyard and imagine footprints that end at the gate, small steps that never cross the threshold in time. I imagine the other life, the sister I never met, in the space between what was done and what might have been. Once a long time ago, I believed secrets could be kept for love. Now I know that love does not grow in the shadow of omission. It grows under the fierce and awful light of the truth, even when the truth leaves you with nothing but the weight of your choices to hold.